as my husband would put it. Okay, so I will try and send you the PowerPoint, and you can email it to everyone. So now, going back to so we're talking about the 8 principles. So the first one was accuracy and fidelity. Very quickly, so you will have this on the slides, but just to go over it, to preserve the meaning of the message. So this is very wordy. I try to kind of simplify it in what we mean. When interpreters try to render all messages in their entirety accurate and as faithful as possible and to the best of their abilities, and so this is very important, without additions. So these are the issues that we face as interpreters. Addition, distortion, omission, or embellishment of the meaning. So that changes the accuracy. What does it mean? Sometimes, either for different reasons, as we interpret, we tend to add few words here and there. And those few words here and there can make a huge impact. They can change everything. So sometimes it's done in a very unconscious level, and sometimes it's done consciously. So sometimes, someone adding information can be, the service provider says, oh, you need to fill out this form, and then you say, you need to fill out this form. Remember, this is the form that you did, and so you add this. Remember that day when we were here, you did this form, it's about the immigration, and so you add information. No one asked you to add this information, but you did, right? They would say a certain word, and you would say, for example, interior works, and you say, oh, interior works is, and then you will explain, and then go into adding words, so it's unnecessary. If the client has a question, they will ask, they will say, I don't understand, can you give me an explanation or whatnot, but you're not the one giving or adding information. Distortion. Distortion can be, sometimes we understand something in a certain way, so we would like to distort the message and convey it that way. So the service provider meant one thing, we understood it in another, or we preferred to understand it in another, and we give the information in a different way. So that's to distort the message. Even if you don't agree with the message of the service provider, you cannot distort it, you cannot change it. So omission. Omission is huge. Omission can happen for different reasons. We are tired. Someone speaks forever, you cannot stop them. So of course, you're going to omit information because of the capacity of the brain is, I think, I'm not quite sure if I have the beginner interpreters, they will have approximately 15 words. So between 2 to 15 words at one go in consecutive interpreting. You should strive for 60 words to be able to do 50, 60 words. So omissions are inevitable. Even to the best of us, it happens. Hopefully not omissions of very important information, but we can omit information because of A, we didn't hear it. We just didn't hear it. B, we really forgot about it because we function in the short-term memory, so they give us a big chunk of information and we kind of transferred one information, completely forgot about the second one, and we omitted information. Sometimes omitting information is, you don't know the term, so you're like, they give you, and you need to do A, B, C, D, and you're like, okay, I don't know D, so you're like, you need to do A, B, C, D, under the carpet. So that's omitting, and so when this happens, the good thing about consecutive is that you can always go back and ask, and that is the beautiful thing. You don't have that luxury in simultaneous. In simultaneous, you need to do it, no matter what. Consecutive, you can just stop and say, the interpreter would like to ask if you can repeat the 4th word you mentioned, right? And they will say, oh yes, and they will give you option 4. And then you say, oh okay, can you give me another word? The interpreter would like to ask for a synonym or clarification of that word. Can you paraphrase it? So you can always ask for those things and they will gladly do it. So that's the good thing about consecutive. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't do it too often or for things that are, I would say not important, but don't do it all the time. That means if you stop the service provider or the client, the interpreter would like to interrupt, can you please clarify this term? 2 minutes later, the interpreter would like to interrupt, can you paraphrase this term? So if you're doing that a lot within those hour, that means that you were not competent for that assignment, you're really not prepared for that terminology. So next time, make a note, either prepare yourself for the terminology, or sometimes, unfortunately, certain interpreters, they need to decline certain assignments. You really need to know, in Master will say, lie down on your, it doesn't make any sense when I say it in English, but I'm just going to say it anyway. We say, lie down on the bed as long as you are. That doesn't make any sense now in English that I just said it. It means you need to know how much you know. Right? So you really need to know how much you know. Okay, so confidentiality, there's no need for me to repeat all of that. It's just the definition, sticking to, I just want to point out one thing. When I do the introduction and I say I will keep everything confidential, be careful not to say everything will be kept confidential or we will keep everything confidential. You can only be responsible for yourself. If you say everything will be kept confidential, that means that you are siding with everyone else in the room and saying these guys as well will keep everything confidential. That might not be true. So you always say I will keep everything confidential because you're responsible for yourself. Okay, so be careful how you word that. Impartiality. So we don't show any preference or bias to any party involved in the interpreted encounter. This sometimes can be very difficult because of sometimes the client thinks that we are working with the service provider, or we are working for them. But we're neither, yes, we have been called by the service provider to do this service, but we're not really working for them on their behalf, on their side. So I will show you a video later on of how we can deal. Sometimes it's very difficult, especially if we have a perceived authority of someone. So a lawyer calls us, or a doctor, and we sense that these are the authorities in a way. And in a way we try to side with them somehow. Just be aware of that. Do not side with anyone, just interpret. Because it can be very easy. Sometimes doctors or nurses would go and say, well, what did you think? What did you think about this client? Or do you think that this is what happened? They will ask you questions. The only way you can answer, as long as it's about, you would say, well, I've had people, coming to me and say, what did you think about the client? Do you think that they're telling the truth? Or do you think that that's what happens? And I would say, well, unfortunately I cannot comment about the client because it's not my level of expertise. But if you want to ask me about the language, I thought, and especially in medical, I will only comment about language. Sometimes we have people who have strokes, and I would say, I thought that the language was incoherent. I thought that they were not making sense. So everything about language I can comment. Anything else, I don't make any comments. Okay, so that kind of keeps me impartial as well. I'm just repeating this, sorry guys. Respect for persons. I can add, certainly from experience, I go to hospitals and, you see people in very devastating situations, right? And they're not always as pretty or they don't smell as good all the time, right? But that doesn't mean that we should show disrespect. So prepare yourself for that. Prepare yourself for those reactions that you might not be prepared for, right? If someone, smells, looks, says things in a way that maybe is not acceptable to you. If you really have an issue with something, that's a conflict of interest, right? If you really cannot deal with a certain situation, you need to report and say, listen, I cannot work with this person, or I cannot do this assignment. So that's conflict of interest. To be honest, I'm struggling right now. I have this client, and I'm really, every interpreting assignment, I'm sweating before I go because I suffer. We just don't click perfectly, and I know that we shouldn't click because it doesn't matter, but it's very difficult for me to interpret for her. I'm still not there, the conflict of interest, but if this continues like this, I might. So just be aware of the assignments, right? Just be aware of that, but always have in mind that you're interpreting for people who really need you. They really, they don't want to be the one isolated and not knowing the language, but they really need you, so be aware of that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry.
Please, I hate just being the one.
Going back, like, I don't know, you haven't referred, but I wanted to ask you, like, casual interpretation, like, for example, you were talking about lawyers, police. I'm going to refer to the police. If you have to interpret, like, you're on the street and something happened, and there's a witness over there that probably you know them or anything, and they ask you to translate to the police in order to see, you know, to interpret what the witness saw. Well, I mean, is the police after you talked, after the interpretation passed, started to ask you question about what really happened in terms of the witness? Were you able to answer to them?
Sorry, let me just clarify. So you were saying if something happened on the street and there's a witness and the witness doesn't speak English, speaks Spanish, and you just happened to be there, or you were called in the capacity of an interpreter? Because that's kind of different.
Well, either or. Like I was asking, like general, like if you're there and they ask you to, you translate it. I mean, you interpret it, right? And then the police ask you about the witness
So,
after
okay.
you interpret it.
So two things here. If I was called as an interpreter at an assignment, there was a police officer there, but regardless, and the person that is giving the statement is someone that I know, is a friend of mine.
Okay.
The first thing that I would say is I need to disclose that the interpreter knows this person. The interpreter feels that there's no